Good morning, fellow travellers of the journey of humankind. Anyway, I'm doing my commute this morning, and I've been thinking about buttons. Traffic. Right, so the rather esteemed Jeremy Keith on adactio.com posted his blog post hydration or hydrate, something like that, and it's a good post, obviously, and but there was one thing that jumped out at me. Actually, there was one tiny little detail that he mentions, and it made me think back to a previous time of web development. And he's talking about the idea of progressive enhancement, and how frameworks like I'm not going to get into the semantics of the wording or anything like that, but frameworks like Next and potentially Gatsby, they purport to be progressively enhanced. Or they allow you to progressively enhance, or you can use it to progressively enhance. Certainly the way that I use Next, I'm a big fan of Next.js. The reason I like it is because it will allow me to use the same code to generate the full markup required for the server side and for the client side. So what I mean by that is that when you request the page from a Next-based project, you should get all the markup you need to be able to render the page. Okay, so that's good. It means that we're not putting all the work in the browser. It means that we don't have a completely kind of like an empty shell of markup being delivered down the wire, and it affords some resilience against like the JavaScript breaking. But here's the rub, and Jeremy kind of raises that it doesn't work if JavaScript doesn't work. So you deliver this kind of like, I don't know, frozen shell or something. Anyway, so in his post he goes on to say, if there is a button that requires JavaScript interaction, the JavaScript should make the button. Now, that's not his conclusion, but that tiny little point, kind of in my head harks back to a decade ago and more of web development, and kind of one of the like basic requirements of progressive enhancement, particularly is because we couldn't really rely on JavaScript at all in progressive enhancement, or certainly the ideas were very much kind of, oh my god, there's so much traffic on this road. The ideas were kind of mixed up between, here we go, making a page work without JavaScript would be a way of progressive enhancing. Like, that's nonsense. But the point is that if you had like a search button or a drop down that required JavaScript, you would actually wire that up in the browser, and you would generate the markup in the browser. And one of the reasons that I would think to try and avoid that is because it would put a cost on the person browsing the site, put a cost on the browser itself to do the work to generate that part of the DOM tree that gives me an interactive element that would only work with JavaScript enabled. But actually, fuck that. Like, React is entirely in the browser. Are we worried about a button? So, surely that kind of thinking needs to kind of return. I don't know if people are thinking about it now or not, or if it's just, I don't know whether anyone ever thought about it like that. I think they maybe did. But, oh God. But, yeah, I think that when we think about, people using Next frameworks and frameworks similar to that, when we think about like server-side rendered in air quotes, when we think about what we actually deliver over the wire, that needs to be usable without any JavaScript. And for the most part, certainly the Next-based projects that I have been working on, they have been. That's kind of the whole point. It is usable without JavaScript. Links work, all the forms work, and so on. All the navigation works. It's pretty easy to neglect that idea of only putting a button on the page if it requires JavaScript. And I looked at a fairly simple project of mine recently, which I turned off JavaScript and I looked at like what worked, and all of it worked. All the links worked, all the interaction, all the form submission, all the kind of like adding elements and so on worked, except for one button right at the bottom, which was a delete button, and it was a button by itself that said delete this thing. And I had, like, think about it, all I had done is create a button element in React, added an on-click handler to say, do an XHR post to the API to get rid of the thing. The solution is simple, right? It's just put it in a form. That's all it needed. It needed to be in a form, and that would have fixed the whole problem. So yeah, Jeremy's post, which it touches on a lot more than just that, but to me, one thing that really leapt out is this returning to this idea of if a button or an interaction requires JavaScript, then it should be made with JavaScript in the browser. And that kind of thinking about the actual software development of a Next project, that kind of puts a little twist on things. And you can conditionally render things with a server-side flag. Like, I think you can do dynamic imports. You can say only import this component if we are doing like server-side render at schools. Where are you going, bicycle? Oh, in the middle of the road. He really is in the middle of the road. Not sure where he's going. Oh god. I think cycling is a superb form of travel, but if you're going to cycle directly in the middle of the road, you're not. He keeps looking over his shoulder. You eventually want to turn. Anyway, yeah, right. So, buttons need JavaScript, should be made with JavaScript, and we can do things to make that work in JavaScript. And making pages like work without JavaScript and actually genuinely progressive enhanced really is not that difficult. The frameworks, certainly Next, allows you to do that. I'm sure Vue or Nuxt, whatever it is, allows you to do that. I'm not so sure about Gatsby. I'm not familiar with Gatsby. I'm not a big fan of Gatsby, only because I found a whacking great nose script inside of Gatsby saying this works better without JavaScript, and with JavaScript, and I found that it worked better without JavaScript, or it certainly was faster. So I haven't really dug into it, but anyway, that's the point. God. All right. Cool. So